Thinking Sideways.
I don't understand.
Does not compute.
You never know.
Insufficient data to formulate a reply.
What?
Stories of things we simply don't know the answer to.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Thinking Sideways. I'm Steve. As always, I'm joined by my co-hosts,
Devin.
And Joe.
And once again, we're going to look into kind of a big mystery.
And we're going to solve it.
Yeah, I don't know about that. But we've gotten a lot of listener requests for this particular story, and we finally gave in. We're going to do it.
We've also gotten a lot of listener requests for longer shows, so just keep in mind, this is what you asked for.
Yeah.
It is going to be a long one because, ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about the Voynich Manuscript.
Dun, dun, dun.
And a lot of people have probably heard of the manuscript, but we're gonna go through all of the details, and you're gonna be really surprised at how much there is. To give it a basic overview, the Voynich Manuscript is a book which is written in an unknown language, and it's full of illustrations.
Or maybe a known language, but
We don't know what it is.
an unknown
Alphabet. That's possible.
That's possible.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Or
Let's
maybe
start.
a strange code.
It could be
Maybe
a strange
cipher.
code. Let's start with the history and talk about the book first.
Probably the simplest place to start.
Probably the beginning, the best place.
Usually.
Okay. The book itself, it's called the Voynich Manuscript because it was purchased by a man named Wilfred Voynich in 1912. But it's been around for several hundred years, and we know some of the history, or people guess at some of the history. And I'll just dive right into the history.
Yeah.
Somewhere between 1600 to 1610, it's believed that the book was owned by the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II.
Mm-hmm. And this would, by the way, be well over 100 years after it was created.
Well, according to the theories that of the age of creation, yes. So this is a partial history.
So this has passed through a lot of famous hands.
It has.
Yeah.
From there, it left Emperor Rudolph II's hand and was owned theoretically by his imperial distiller, a man by the name of Jacobus Tepensks, which is an easy name to say.
Super easy.
Yeah.
It ends in a CZ, so I think...
I nailed that.
Yeah.
Between 1630 to 1645, they think that a German Bohemian alchemist named George Baresch owned it. 1645 to 1665. It's believed that it was owned by Johannes Marcus Marci of Kronland.
Yeah, wherever that is.
Yeah, and I tried to figure that out.
That might actually be a store, not a country.
Yeah. I went to the local Kronland.
Yeah.
Yeah. He actually, it was, I read about this. He was friends with George Baresch, and when Baresch died, he willed the book to Marcy of Kronland, the store.
Okay.
Yeah, and apparently he was friends with Mr. Kircher, and Baresch had actually been in correspondence with Kircher because he felt that Kircher had the smarts to actually decipher or break this code.
Oh, you're right. I remember reading that.
Yeah.
Wait, who's Kircher?
He was a very bright guy. Anyway, but so he actually hand copied sections of the book and wrote to Athanasius Kircher twice with these and asking him for his input. And Kircher wanted the book itself so he could look at it, and Baresch was never willing to do that. But then when he died, he willed it to his friend Johannes Marci of Kronland, the store, and he willed it to him, who almost immediately gave it to
Kircher.
To Kircher, because he felt like Kircher was the only guy who'd be able to make heads or tails out of it.
That explains the gaps that I couldn't quite pin down.
So Kircher, wound up with it. I guess it was destiny.
Yeah, destiny.
Yeah.
For the next couple of centuries, we're talking 250 plus years. We don't know where it was. It's believed that the Jesuits had it and that they moved it around Europe from place to place. Why or how is unknown.
Well, they're pretty good at keeping records.
Yes.
At saying, we don't know if this is important or not, but it looks like it might be, so we're going to just go
We'll just
ahead
hang
and-
on to it.
Yeah.
I'll just
One
put it
of
in the
those
back
things.
corner.
Yeah.
That's one of those things. I can imagine myself just rooting around in my basement, 2 boxes, and like, oh, well, there it is. You know, it's like, I mean, you wouldn't believe it. I was down in my basement the other day, this last weekend, doing a little house cleaning and and going through stuff, and I found stuff I'd totally forgotten I ever owned. And, yeah, it's like, oh wow,
It's the joy of having a basement.
oh yeah.
Let's see. From there, as we said, 1912, Wilfrid Voynich purchases the book. We don't know where he gets it from, or I don't know. I know he purchased it, but I don't remember exactly
I
where
believe
he
he
got
bought
it.
it. I believe he bought it in Italy.
Did he?
Yeah.
I'll run with that because I can't remember exactly where. When he died, he gave it to, I believe, willed it to his wife Ethel, who then gave it to a woman named Anne Nill, who then sold it in 1961 to a man by the name of H.P. Krauss. In 1969, Krauss donated it to Yale University's Voynich Rare Book and Manuscript Library.
So Yale has it.
So Yale has it
Still?
today.
For now.
Okay.
They still have it today.
Yeah, for now.
Yeah. So that's
Still,
where
yeah.
it is. That's where they've done a great job of getting good photos of it and making it available to
Yeah.
everybody. But it's a several-year-old, 100-year-old text, so we don't want everybody leafing through it
Oh
constantly.
yeah, I'm sure it's
so.
under lock
But it
and
is,
key.
but I think it is available if you go in and you're a researcher of any kind. I know they've made it available to certain forensic scientists.
They have. You've got to have the credentials
Mm-hmm.
to
I would
prove
think.
that you can get to it. You and I
Right.
couldn't just walk
Oh.
in there and ask.
We
for
have the credentials. What are
Absolutely.
you
Yeah,
talking
thinking
about?
sideways. But the thing about it is I've looked at their photographs of the book online, and it's very clear, and it's you can
They're
zoom in.
really great.
Yeah,
very
it's
high
excellent.
quality.
You can zoom in.
They've done a really
and
good
look
job.
at high detail and everything. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So we've talked about the history that we think we know.
That we're fairly sure.
That we're fairly sure of.
Okay.
People believe they figured it out. Folks have tried to pinpoint where it might have and when it might have been made, and some of that they've done based on characteristics that are in the text itself. Let me just run through some of that. So it has what they refer to as a upright handwriting style that's reminiscent of Carolinian minuscule, which evidently was in use from 800 to 1200. Or it's there's another. It's Italian. How do you say that, Joe?
Quattrocento.
Okay, which I guess is called the humanist hand, which was from 14 to 1500. And the carbon dating kind of puts it in that range as well. People have also said that the drawings have parallel hatching, and hatching is when you draw a series of lines to infer shading, which is similar to, one of the first guys that really did a lot of that is Da Vinci. If you look at a lot of old drawings, that's how he gave depth and shadow as you cross-hatch in there.
Yeah.
So people think that it could have been from his era, which would have been, if it was made in Germany or that style came out, it would have been in Germany at around 1410. If it was made in Florence, it would have been 1440, or if it was after 1450, then it could have been anywhere because that style had gone across Europe.
It had gone viral.
Yes.
Yeah. But so that's a pretty good, solid, 60 or 70-year-old window, right?
Yeah, for the cross-hatching, yes.
Yeah.
And
But-
for that kind of matches with the hand style.
For the Italian,
handwriting
yeah.
style?
For the Italian handwriting style, yes, it does.
Okay.
But we've also got some things. Some people who have owned the book have made notes on it and in the margin, and that handwriting seems to be done in the style of the 15th century. So we're looking at the 1400s. And there's some of the other notes that are written on it, and this is primarily notes that are in the Zodiac section. That style of handwriting people have pointed to say is from the southwest of France. So there's a lot of different places that it could have been just based on
got
these
around.
basic facts. So it's kind of hard to figure out.
Yeah. So it's a manuscript. Mm-hmm. And so it's like a book,
Yes.
right? And it's 9.3 inches by 6.4 inches by 2 inches, right?
So
yeah,
it's 2
not
inches thick.
So it's 2 inches thick.
Yeah, so not a big book though. I mean,
No.
it's like
Not a huge book.
it's not like one of those massive things you think about from like
Which
2
is
by 3
silly
feet.
because you look at the pictures and they look really big.
They do.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
kind of blown up, but it's a little book.
But it's hundreds of vellum pages, and vellum's pretty thin paper material. It's kind of see-through almost a little bit too. So it's possible for there to be a lot of pages in a small amount of space, i.e. like old books, old Bibles, things like that. You see it on paper like that.
Paper's valuable, so you gotta use as much of it as possible.
Yeah, and make it as condensed as possible. So they're collected into 18 what are called quires, which are those little folded areas, right?
It's like this, when you look at a traditionally bound book, if you look at it from the top, you notice that
You have the little
it's in sections.
sections.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and those are folded over and stitched together, and then stitched together into one big book.
Yeah, those are the quires, right?
Yeah.
Each one of those.
Each one of those sections.
Yeah. So depending on how some of the pages are folded or things like that, or how you count them, I guess it's about 240 pages in total. There's some numbering in the right-hand corners of the right-hand pages, which pretty much everybody agrees was done by somebody who owned it.
So this is one of those
Later.
people who, after the fact, owned the book
Yeah,
and
it
wrote
wasn't
in
done by the person who did it, but who was kind of maybe archiving it. They owned it. They were like, okay, we should probably number these pages.
It might be they kept dropping the book, and all the quires would fall apart. He didn't know what order to put them in.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he started numbering them.
Yeah. So they are numbered 1 through 116, but there's some number gaps. So people think that it's probably more like 272 pages originally altogether.
Yeah, because there are missing pages, and we don't know what's supposed to be on them.
Right. And then Wilfrid Voynich, as we mentioned before, acquired the manuscript in 1912. And there's a lot of strong evidence that all the different quires have been kind of reordered.
So people
Throughout
kept
time.
rearranging it the way they thought it should go. Is that? Am I
Yeah.
understanding how that's correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean, again, you drop a book and you're like, I don't remember
Yeah.
where everything goes. I'm just going to shove it back in,
Yeah, it's been around for so long. It's quite possible it's been rebound several times and kind of fallen apart. So, interestingly, if there's missing stuff, and since it used to be in the hands of the Pope, it'd be kind of cool to go through the Vatican's all their archives and see if the missing pages are there. Even though
Yeah, that would be
Yeah.
interesting.
We'll have to
It
send a
might
letter
be.
to the Vatican. Dear Vatican, this is Open Sideways, the podcast. I'm sure you've heard of us.
Surely, we're Pope Francis's favorite podcast.
Yeah.
Clearly.
So, anyways, back to the story.
Oh, sorry.
So, based on modern analysis, we pretty much know that it was written by a quill pen with iron gall ink for the text and the figure outlines, and then colored paint, kind of like watercolor colored paint.
Yeah,
right?
it's kind of watercolor.
Was applied to the figures, and the book has been carbon dated to the early 15th century, so the early 1400s. So that kind of corresponds with what we were talking about with the history of it as well.
Okay, so I'm sure you guys want to know about the text itself. So it's clearly written from left to right, and so it's got a pretty straight left margin and a kind of a ragged right margin, which is what is to be expected. So that gives it's probably more likely European than Semitic in origin. Some of the longer sections are broken into paragraphs, and some of them actually have bullet points. They're shaped like stars or flowers, and there's no punctuation. And I've noticed this myself going through the text. It's like there's no obvious punctuation in there unless certain characters represent a period, but then we'd be seeing them consistently, and I'm not seeing that pattern. There's no indications of errors or corrections, so there's no words that have been crossed out. There's no, how you do that little thing where you write the word above, and there's a little V up pointing up to to where it's supposed to go. None of that.
Yeah.
None of that going on.
And for as long as this text is, that's amazing.
It
that
is
there's
amazing.
no
Yeah.
corrections.
But I feel like it happened a lot in those days, but you just like wrote it and rewrote it. You used the paper as like, right? I mean,
Yeah, I don't know how quickly vellum absorbs ink either, but but from looking
Modern
at
vellum sucks ink in pretty quickly.
as I say,
Now, I don't know about 400 years ago how it was,
Yeah,
but I know
old-
that
yeah.
it pulls it in pretty quick.
Yeah, the old timey stuff. I was just wondering if the ink takes a while to soak in, and if you have to have a moment to wipe it off if you make a mistake and then rewrite it.
You might be able to blot it up.
But
But
you
I
don't
think,
know. You would see that. You'd see the
Yeah.
evidence of
you
that.
would.
though.
And
yeah.
books back then were all handwritten.
Yeah.
They didn't have the printing press or
Right.
anything. And I think often you see books that didn't have, I mean, some of them did have mistakes in them, but some of them didn't. And I think that's one of the intriguing things about this manuscript is that, it, you know, assuming that it is a real text, it maybe suggests that there are other versions of it, or there were other versions of
Yeah, I
it.
was going to say, to have written it enough times that you didn't make any errors anymore. Back in the day when monks would write the Bibles and they would each just sit down and make the same page over and over and over, you had to write that thing a lot of times
But
to
here's
get
what
it
I'll
right.
tell you is that having a job in which I often write the same thing over and over and over again, it's always like the 50th time that you make a mistake, right? It's never like the first time because you're like on it. You're like, I got to
really
do
paying
this the
attention.
right way. You're really paying attention. And then it's like after you feel like you've written enough times that you like have it is when you make the mistakes.
You get comfortable.
Yeah, you get comfortable.
That's why you
So,
got to do the old cut and paste.
Yeah.
That's what I do in my job. A lot of boilerplate in my reports.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, okay, back to the text.
Sorry.
Yeah. No,
Tangent.
that's okay. That's okay. I do it to you all the time, so no worries. It's
true.
So anyway, no indications of errors or corrections, and that might be significant. I'll talk about that later, but I'll hold you all in suspense for now. We're going to talk about that after the commercial. Yeah. So there are over 170,000 letters in this text. They call them glyphs. And there are 35,000 words of varying length in there, from a couple of letters to about 10. They're very simple pen strokes for the most part. So the words seem to follow like a phonological or orthographic law. This is linguistic stuff that I have a hazy understanding of. But meaning that certain characters appear in each word, like vowels, for example. You can't write an English letter without a word without a vowel. So some vowels are going to just have to be there. Some characters never follow others. Some always follow others. There's been a couple that I've noticed just from perusing the text that always seem to go together. There's
like a Q and a U.
Q and a U, exactly. In this text, there are two letters, then they might just be a single character too, but it looks like an L and an F, and they always follow each other. And so it probably is, or it could just be a single character, I don't know. But so
The characters seem fairly simple, though. I think right. They're two.
Yeah, they're
strokes
not
at the most.
ornate.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
not at
they
all.
they are in one way, but in not another way.
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, characters. Some characters always follow. Some characters never follow other characters. Some can be doubled or tripled even, but others not. Some words only occur in certain sections, and some occur throughout the manuscript. And I've noticed this too, even though I haven't read the whole thing. I've sort of hopped around a little bit and looked at various pages, and I've noticed some words that appear a lot in some sections and not in others. So, and that maybe possibly has something to do with the subject matter of the section. I'm not really sure. There aren't a lot of repetitions among the labels that are attached to the illustrations themselves. Even though there's much repetition in the text itself, there's not in the labels.
Which suggests that they're actually labels.
Probably.
Yeah. So, and as Joe was kind of saying, there are different sections. There are actually 6 different sections.
And this is what we've defined it as 6 sections.
Yeah, they're fair. I think, as Joe was saying, they are fairly distinct, at least with the illustrations. And I think that's, the one thing that we can kind of know about this manuscript is we don't know what the words say, anything like that, but we can look and say, oh, the drawings in this kind of group are all the same. So we're going to say this is a section. So the 6 sections, there's an herbal section that has drawings of plants, most of which are like really unidentifiable or kind of almost like impressionistic paint drawings of.
And
these.
do you say that because of the coloring, the way that
It's not just the
colors
coloring,
are applied?
but that they're also kind of
Stylized?
abstract. Yeah, stylized. I think is probably the best word.
Okay.
Or it could be that they were drawn by somebody who couldn't draw.
Who couldn't draw, which
Yeah.
would be interesting because it would mean there were multiple artists because some of the other drawings are like
Some
really
are
good,
some are- yeah.
really great. Then there's the astronomical section, which has illustrations of the sun, moon, stars, and zodiac symbols. The so-called biological section, which is kind of the most interesting and fascinating one because it's got some weird kind of anatomical drawings with small female human figures populating systems of tubes and transporting green liquid from place to place.
Yeah, some
They
of those-
also have a lot
weird.
of Christian symbology mixed in with them, and they look really European. And then we have the cosmological section with mostly circular drawings that are kind of they're so far they're unexplained. To me, it looks a lot like video game maps. Right? Like different worlds in a video game map, and they're like there's bridges in between some of them, but not others, and they're all kind of circular and weird. I don't know. That's just what it looks like to me. There's the pharmaceutical section, which it's called that because it has drawings of containers, which often have small plant parts like leaves or roots next to the containers. And recipe section, which consists mostly of like lots of short paragraphs that have like weird star drawings in the margin. So it's definitely worth the time to go out and take a look at the pictures.
Indeed, and they're fascinating. I think we might have mentioned this already, but they believe that the color was added to the illustrations later on.
Yeah.
And the research points out that they believe that they only had four colors available. So every time there's a blue, it's the same blue, whether it's thinner or stronger to make it lighter or darker, but it's always the same blue or the same green. So they didn't have a whole lot of colors available, which makes sense because you had to mix color by hand at that point.
You crush the same berries.
Exactly. And it's not easy to make. So you use all of it, and you just make as much as you need.
You know, one of the things about the drawings and everything that kind of makes me wonder is that, as you know, paper was probably pretty scarce back in those days. I sort of wonder if somebody was like making these sketches, somebody else came along and needed some paper to write on, and just basically wrote around these drawings, but it was completely unrelated, and then somebody else came along later and did a little coloring, treated them like coloring books.
I mean, it's always possible.
Yeah.
Anything's possible when it comes to the Voynich manuscript.
It really is.
And that's one of the, just as an aside, we talked about the history before, but it's amazing how long people have been puzzling over this thing. Some of the people that like Mr. Marcy that we talked about earlier that wouldn't turn it over to, what's his name, Mr. Kirchner. He spent 20 years trying to figure this thing out.
Some people currently have spent longer.
Yeah, and it is perplexing. And the illustrations are interesting because typically there's one illustration per page. And as Joe was alluding to, it takes up the majority of the page. And if we look at the plant one specifically, it's typically the entire plant from root to tip. So it's maybe they have a flower drawn here or there that's kind of a highlight section, but most of it is just that one plant. And that's why people believe that the text is about those plants. Some of the other illustrations of the women that you were talking about before, a little more perplexing, I think is the word to use there.
Well,
as to what the heck they mean.
Really good explanation for that. I know we're going to get to.
Yes.
Yeah, we got to get to the theories later. Let's talk really fast going through this description period.
Yeah.
Because I know what people want to hear is all these jazzy, cool theories, and then they want us to solve this mystery.
Well, that, my friends, is kind of the basic description of the Voynich manuscript.
Again, I strongly encourage you to go look at pictures if you haven't already, or look at more pictures.
I'm sure they're doing it right now.
Because it's you can't describe it with words.
And it is worth it to find the sites that have lots of the images, and high quality versions, because if you look at them in, say, a news article, because there's been a lot of news articles about it lately, it doesn't do it justice. It's when you get one of those ones that you can zoom in multiple times and really see the detail, that's when it really kind of gets in. It's really intriguing at that point. Wait, this isn't just some crudely drawn thing. There's actually some decent detail in there, some really interesting stuff that I mean, obviously we all puzzled over it, but it's really interesting nonetheless. But it is that time, as always, where we go into everybody's favorite part, which is theories.
Yay!
And I've got the first theory.
Let's hear it.
So our very first theory is that The Voynich manuscript was written by Leonardo da Vinci in a private language.
None other than Leonardo da Vinci.
Yeah,
Might as well
Leo.
start off with the top, work our way down from there.
I gotta say from the start though that Leo was a better artist.
Yes. Okay, so here's the thing. People think, the folks that subscribe to this theory, they believe that Da Vinci wrote this when he was a very young man, maybe a teenager or just starting his career, but he hadn't really developed his system of drawing. So this is very early on. So it's kind of, it would be like looking somebody who was in the Cubist movement, but looking at their early works when they were trying to figure out how to draw in a Cubist way. It's not as developed as the rest of his work.
You just art nerded out.
I did. I totally art nerded out. I can't help it. Da Vinci was known for writing in semi-coded ways. He made what is, you may have heard of mirror script.
Yeah.
And what it is that if you took a piece of writing and you held it against a mirror, right now you can't read it. But if you wrote it as if it was that mirror image, it looks like utter gibberish. Think about it. Most people write, and they're writing tips to one side. The letters flow to the right in English, typically. So if you were to start writing it from right to left, and everything go the other direction.
We should qualify. It's not just English. It's anything that uses the
European.
alphabet. Yeah.
Yes, European. That uses
the Gregorian alphabet, right?
Yes, I believe that's the proper phrase to use.
Is that the right?
But
Speaking of his mirror script, so did Da Vinci use a mirror, or did he simply learn how to write backwards?
he learned how to write backwards.
Okay.
So he perfected it so that he was writing it the wrong way. He was also known for writing with his right hand, but he was initially a southpaw. He was a lefty. And in that time, if you wrote with your left hand,
You were the devil.
it was a sign of the devil, and anybody who wanted to write left-handed learned to write with their right hand.
Yeah.
He rebelled against that later in his life and went back to using his left. This theory, which is primarily advocated by Edith Sherwood, she believes that this was something that he did when he was first learning to write with his right hand.
How young is she saying that he would have been?
Late teens, early 20s is the impression I got.
The problem I have with this theory is that, first of all, the drawings don't look like Leonardo da Vinci.
They
Not
don't.
at all.
They don't.
I mean, you can say, well, it was an early version of him, but the thing about artists is it always kind of looks like that person.
You tend to have a style. There's inherent things that you do.
Particularly in that time in his life, he would have been much more advanced than this.
It's also been pointed out that because of the cross-hatching that is used, some of the hatching, believe that he wrote it with his right hand and he drew it with his left, and the hatching flows in the direction that he would have done it with his left hand, which is from right to left. He would have gone up or down, but it would have been done. It's done at that angle. Whereas if I sit down and do hatching with mine, it's gonna flow towards the upper right hand corner, and this seems to flow towards the upper left hand corner.
I see.
Okay.
So she says he wrote it with his right hand, so that's why the script doesn't match most of his notes. It also doesn't have as many. It does have similar flourishes that he wrote, which a flourish is you can cross your T, or 12-year-old girls love crossing their T and drawing a line up and putting a little heart at the end. That would be a flourish.
Right.
Or dotting your eyes with a heart.
Yes, those kind of things, or anything that is beyond what is needed to make it a little prettier, is an easy way to think of what a flourish is for. I mean, this whole theory, I agree, there are holes in the theory. And here's what I really, really found to be the issue is, okay, I could see that maybe he invented a language, the drawings don't match, but let's just say he was goofing around. Okay, so he was just doing it in a different style.
Maybe he was drawing with the pen in his mouth.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But the problem is, Da Vinci was known for drawing little things into his drawings, and there was little codes, evidently, that he would put in. And once people start grabbing this, they start seeing what they want in the images, in the illustrations, and suddenly there's little spikes off the edge of a leaf, and suddenly people say, oh, you see that? That spells Leo if you connect the edges, and it's seeing what you want to see, and that's where at first I thought this. I was like, wow, this is really cool. This kind of makes sense, and then it went to shambles on
and
me.
you know, it makes sense for me when we look at the maidens in the bath, for instance. I can see how somebody could say this artist evolved into Leonardo da Vinci. The plant stuff, though, is really what trips me up because it's really awful. Like,
it's crude.
I mean, just to put it bluntly, it's
crude.
It's very crude, right?
Yeah.
There's no perspective or anything like that. So unless we're saying, da Vinci did this when he was like 7 years old.
And then came back and wrote it when he was 20.
I'm not buying it.
Okay.
I'm just not.
Well,
and there's so many plant drawings in here that it's about that, right? I don't know.
Well, here's the other thing, is that Da Vinci left behind a lot of paperwork, lots of drawings, lots of writings.
Yeah, he's prolific.
Not one, so if he had invented a private language, he wouldn't have let it go to waste.
No.
A lot of his papers, there would be stuff around there. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why there's examples of his mirror script, because he did a bunch of his notes in mirror script. So
exactly.
we know that he did that.
If he had mirror script, why would he? I mean, if he had this, why would he do mirror script?
Exactly.
You know?
No point.
Mirror script might have been easier. I'll defend it for a second. Let's say that he made this up. He made this secret language of his own, this written language, and then he realized, I want to send a letter to Antonio, but Antonio doesn't know this language, so he can't read it. Whereas if he sends it to Antonio and it's written in mirror script, Antonio knows to just hold it against a mirror and read what's in the mirror, and that's much simpler for other people that you're corresponding with.
Other people, but...
True that, but if you really want to encrypt something, and Leonardo was not that dumb. He knew that. He knew that that's the most easily crackable cipher ever, of all time. So if he was truly interested in keeping secrets from people, other than maybe he just learned how to write backwards just for a novelty kind of thing.
I kind of think it might have been.
Yeah.
There's something he probably did it on a whim to entertain himself and then just kept running with it. Because he was a bit obsessive. He really would. It seems like, based on the things he came up with in some of his writings, he would just keep working at it, which is why he came up with some very phenomenal things.
Yeah,
but
I think
he didn't let it go.
I think a lot of geniuses have that obsessive part of their personality.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, and so, but he did some good stuff. Well, anyway, let me talk about another theory, which is that it's a cipher. Yeah.
You love ciphers.
I know.
you do.
Ciphers are fun. Yeah. But I'm not the one that came up with this theory. This guy came up with what I think is probably one of the most bizarre encryption algorithms of all time. So this guy, his name was is William Newbold. He's a professor of philosophy at the University of Pennsylvania. He cracked this code, which involves anagrams of 55 to 110 characters. And he found the characters not actually in the words or the letters themselves, but in fluctuations or variations in the edges of the ink in the letters. So by finding little wavy things in the letters, by looking at them through magnifying glasses.
Wait, so let me make sure I because this one was weird. I read it and I thought I got it, but you have a better handle on it than I do. So if I were to take a felt tip pen and just draw a line on a sheet of paper, and the ink's going to bleed out,
and it's going to do it irregularly,
right? And so you're saying he then looked at that irregular edge. And that's how he deciphered it?
Apparently, that's my understanding of how it works. And
Weird.
And then, so there's information contained apparently in those little irregularities, and then he converted that information into letters, which were themselves anagrams, which had to be rearranged to form a coherent message.
For what, 272 pages?
Yeah, exactly.
Worth of.
Well, it wasn't 170,000 character anagram, no, but it was anagrams of between 55 and 110 letters, and so it's like, as an encryption technique, I can't think of anything more unreliable.
I agree.
or difficult. So it's bizarre. But there are other people who have thought about it. I mean, there are people all over the web who believe that this is actually a cipher. There was a guy named John Manley in 1931. He wrote a critical paper about Newbold's theory, and he did point out, as I just did, that the unreliability of anagramming for cryptography is just, it just totally shoots a hole in the whole thing. And
Nobody does ciphers with anagrams, right? I mean, like,
No.
that's not a real thing. That's a thing you do when you're like in second grade and you think you're cool.
Yeah.
If you're actually trying to communicate information to somebody, you don't just rely on, you're going to be able to totally rearrange these words into the right word.
Well,
particularly in a language like English, but in other languages too.
If
right?
you have a friend who's like, and you're both totally really geniuses at anagrams, and some people are.
Yeah.
Not me, but some people are. Then I suppose you could actually communicate doing that. But for most of us, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's an issue.
So as far as it being a cipher, if it is a cipher, it can only be one kind of cipher, and that is a substitution cipher. Because if you look at this page, this is from page 75 of the manuscript. If you look at the two words that I've underlined,
Oh, yeah.
they're identical, correct?
There's 3 of them on this one page, yeah.
Yeah. All right, so if it's anything other than a substitution cipher, then if it's some really sophisticated kind of cipher, then the odds are that, say, an 8-letter word are going to be translated by the sophisticated, say it's a one-time pad, that the encoded text is going to be the exact same word, especially 3 times on a page. Statistically, that's just not possible, or it's possible, but it's like infinitesimally small odds of that happening.
Unless it's a name.
Yeah, well, unless it's a name.
Like
yeah.
it's the name of a city or something like that.
Yeah, well, I don't think in this particular case it is.
On that particular page of the folio, it's not.
But so anyway, as you guys know, I don't know if we mentioned it before or not. The NSA actually had their hands on this thing for a while, and they actually noodled around and tried to make some sense of this, and they were not able to. But if you look at this, that word has to be, since the word appears more than once, this can only be a simple substitution cipher. And so for our listeners who don't know, and you should know if you've been listening to us, but I'll tell you what it is. It's a word where a letter or a symbol is represented by another letter or symbol. So in other words, A would be D, B would be F, C would be X, D would be M, like that. So it's not in any sort of pattern. And then you substitute those letters whenever you substitute one for the other. And so if the NSA had their hands on this, and it quite obviously is a substitution cipher, if it is a cipher at all, then they would have cracked it in about 3 minutes. Not 3 minutes, 30 seconds. yeah. So
they do have some big brains that are really into that stuff.
Yeah, so it cannot be a cipher as far as I can tell.
Okay, well, we'll move on to our next theory.
Yeah, this is pretty exciting, actually.
Yeah, well, what would you title this theory?
I would title this theory, Stephen Bax has solved the mystery.
Okay. Well, we were lucky enough to do an interview about this with a gentleman who has been in the news lately by the name of Stephen Bax, but let's let Dr. Bax introduce himself.
Yeah.
Okay.
My name's Stephen Bax. I'm a professor of applied linguistics in the University of Bedfordshire in England. And my particular interest in the Voynich manuscript is to try and decode it from a linguistic point of view. I mean, others have looked at it from a historical point of view or looking at the pictures and so on. But I'm particularly interested in looking at the language and the script and trying as best I can to make a start on decoding it, because the problem with the manuscript so far has been that since it was written round about perhaps 1420, 1430, no one's been able to decode anything of the script or understand anything of the language. So that's the angle that I'm taking, really.
So Dr. Bax has obviously done a lot of research on the manuscript.
Highly qualified guy.
Very qualified, I would say.
Probably almost as qualified as us.
Maybe a little bit more.
We can be gracious on this one.
Oh.
Yes,
Okay,
very,
fine.
very gracious. But I did, it was really interesting to find out what got Dr. Bax to first start looking at the manuscript.
It was kind of like a random happenstance.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Well, I was listening to the radio about 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago, and there was a really interesting program about John Dee, and they think he might have been the model for the character Prospero in Shakespeare's play The Tempest, a kind of mystical, strange, wizard-like figure. And he was really interesting. He tried hard to speak with angels and communicate with angels, had a large library of different books. And it was thought at one time that he might have owned this manuscript and then sold it on to the Emperor Rudolf II, who was the Holy Roman Emperor, because we know pretty sure it did belong to the Emperor at one time. But it's now thought that actually John Dee didn't have much to do with it. But I got into it by looking at John Dee, listening to a program on the radio, looking at Wikipedia, as of course we all do, and then finding the Voynich manuscript from that, and thought, wow, this has got some really interesting signs and symbols, some of them looking a little bit like Arabic letters. Because I've studied Arabic for so many years, that really intrigued me, and that kind of got me going on it, really.
As we were talking to Dr. Bax, what I really wanted to kind of key in on was what exactly was it in the text that jumped out at him that he first started looking at and working on.
Yeah, kind of his aha moment, right?
It's exactly right. His aha moment.
Yeah.
That's the important piece. Mm-hmm. That's the first piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, I mean, the very first one was I found a pattern which seemed to be the repetition of what looked like A-R-A-R. And that kind of pattern in the manuscript is quite rare. So I thought, well, that might be a borrowing. And it seemed to me to be alongside a plant which I knew to be was called the ar plant in Arabic, which is the juniper plant. So it struck me that it might actually be the name of that plant. Now, I'm not entirely sure that that's correct anymore, but that kind of got me started on looking for the plants, and particularly the first word on each plant page. Because in medieval manuscripts, that's usually where the name of the plant was. The first word was the name of it. So then I started to look at other ones, and besides that, there's a really interesting picture on page 68 of the manuscript, which has a big circle. In the middle, it has a face of the moon, with a rather sad, gloomy face actually drawn on it. Beautiful little picture. The top left-hand corner, there are 7 stars, which people reckon are probably the Pleiades, the 7 sisters, in the constellation of Taurus. So I took somebody else's idea, which said that the word alongside these 7 stars might be the word Taurus. And basically, I split it up into the letters, thinking the first one's probably a T, the second one probably an A, the third one could be a W sound because of the old form of Taurus is Taur. The fourth one would be a R. And that kind of way, then comparing that with other words and other names of the plants, it seemed to me that there were some patterns going on which would help to lead us to a fuller decoding later. But I should just emphasize that at the moment it's still provisional and it's still very, very small. I mean, when I tell people I've deciphered 10 words of a 35,000-word manuscript, they usually fall off their chair. But the point is nobody's ever done any before at all. So I suppose even one word, if you can say with confidence, then that's kind of something. The key thing from my point of view is to look for proper names. And that's partly because previous analyses of language, for example, the decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphics in the 18th and 19th centuries, that was the way that they did it. They looked for proper names like the pharaohs, Ramesses or Cleopatra. And once they'd thought they'd found them, they worked out each letter, for example, K, Cle or Patra, they worked out each letter and the sound related to it. And so they built up a system of sounds and signs. And then from that, they went on to find out that, in fact, that particular language was related to Coptic. So they started with proper names. And I thought it would be useful to try the same approach with the Voynich manuscript. And people have tried similar things before. But I think partly my background in other Oriental languages, such as Arabic, and other languages with different scripts, gave me a kind of handle on which I think helped me to make some progress on it.
But you don't have a Rosetta Stone, do you?
Well, no. I mean, that would be the beauty of it. But unfortunately, we don't have any other manuscript or any other text of any sort with the same letters and symbols as the Voynich manuscript, which is one reason why it's so fascinating. It's the only text in the world which has these letters and symbols. But it has a lot of them. I mean, there are 35,000 words in the text, but we can't read any of them, so it's very frustrating as well.
And so we asked Dr. Bax about some theories that perhaps the language that is in the document, in the manuscript, is the written alphabet or the written language of an extinct language. And here's what he had to say.
Well, the extinct thing, I didn't actually say that. I mean, what I suggest is that the script has definitely become extinct because no one else has used the script. But the language underneath could well be a language that has modern descendants, or could be a fully existent modern language. I mean, let's take the example of Armenian. Let's imagine that it might be Armenian. well, you then say to yourself, why, if it was the language was Armenian, why would they write it in a different script when there's a fully formed Armenian script they could have used? So in other words, it must be some group of people who had to devise a script for themselves because there wasn't a script already there for them. And some people have suggested, interestingly, that it might be Romani, the kind of gypsy language, which also has interesting Indian roots, because obviously the Romani tribes are supposed to have come from India and migrated across Asia into Europe. And that's quite an intriguing idea. I'm not saying I believe that idea, but it's intriguing because, of course, they are a group who didn't have their own script, who would have had to develop their own script if they wanted to encode all of this knowledge that they had. And then arguably, you could argue that group might have been suppressed or died out, and their knowledge and their script died out with them. But yet still we have the Romani language around, which we could use to interpret it. And that does actually have a bearing with Egyptian hieroglyphs. Eventually, Egyptian hieroglyphs were shown to encode the Coptic language, which existed but had been suppressed for many decades and didn't have its own writing system. So there are kind of parallels which make you think it could be something like that.
So one of the places that we ran across Dr. Bax, he's kind of all over the internet right now, was his Reddit AMA that he did, Ask Me Anything. And one of the theories that was floated in this was that it may have been written by this Italian explorer Niccolo de Conti and his Indian wife and children. He was Italian, his wife was Indian. And the flourishes look a little Hindi to me. You know, I really like this theory. So I asked Dr. Bax about it, and he had something kind of interesting to say.
Yeah, I like that theory too. I mean, I like the idea that it's kind of made by a family, or I really like that idea. But the problem is that if we jump too quickly to identify an author, we tend to block out other possibilities. And I think, you know, the idea of your kind of podcast being thinking sideways, you know, I think we've got to kind of keep our minds open and be aware of all kinds of possible things. But I do like that particular idea about the Conti idea. I mean, lots of people assume it was written in Italy because it was found in Italy and because some of the script looks a little bit kind of Latin. But my personal idea is that it was probably a little bit further east than that. And I would, you know, be looking in the area of kind of Turkey, the Caucasus, Western Asia, that kind of thing. But it does have, the thing is, if you look at the pictures, a lot of the pictures are very European in their style. There are lots of European female figures. There's some European clothing in there. There's some interesting European-looking buildings and so on. But when we say European, it could equally be kind of Near Eastern, Turkish, Armenian, Georgian, that kind of area. But I think that's kind of more likely than a purely European origin, mainly because the words that I've managed to identify seem to have more of a kind of Near Eastern, as you said, Arabic, Persian basis, rather than, for example, a Latin basis. So that's kind of where I would kind of go for it at the moment.
Obviously, Dr. Bax has invested 2 years of research into this. He's not just going to let it drop. So he is going to continue to look into the manuscript, but he's got some really creative ideas on how to keep doing that research and how to get some help with that research.
As I say, I've got my website, stephenbax.net, which is, I'm making it more into a forum for people to come in and give their ideas of and so we've got kind of areas for people to look at the plants and give their ideas, areas to look at the stars, and some really interesting contributions now about the star names in the manuscript. And I think that's a good next source for information where we could actually go and try and, I mean, again, typically in those days and also now, a huge number of the star names that we have come from Arabic originally. And that, I think, could be a good source. I don't think that the names in the Voynich manuscript were directly from Arabic, but I think many of them may well be derived from Arabic. So again, that could be another source of helping to identify maybe some new letters, some new sounds, and so on. So that's, I think, is a really exciting area to. But my problem is I'm very ignorant about plants. I'm very ignorant about stars.
Yeah, so am I.
I need a lot more people to kind of chip in and help with their knowledge and say, no, that's a good idea, that's rubbish, and so on.
Yeah, crowdsourcing is a great way to go about solving problems like this.
Well, it is.
So.
I mean, you get a lot of people who basically say, maybe this is crazy, but maybe X, Y, and Z. You say, well, all ideas are on the table. We might as well look at them, and even if you think it's crazy, let's put it in the pot and see where we can go from there.
Okay, at this point, we've gone on quite a bit of time, and I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have to pee. So
we're only halfway done.
Exactly, and so we're going to have a short intermission for your convenience. And we're back.
So this next theory, Dr. Bax actually directed us towards.
Hey, thanks, Dr. Bax.
Thanks, Dr. Bax.
Very nice of him.
He directed us to a article in a periodical, I think it is, called the
Chronica Horticultura.
It's Latin. And the article is called
Biological Section of the Voynich Manuscript, a textbook of medieval plant physiology.
Question mark?
Physiology?
So this theory goes, this theory is put forth by two doctors, Dr. Tiaz and Tiaz. I think they're married, but they might be siblings. I gotta be honest. I don't know.
I couldn't tell.
They have the same last name. It may actually just be a coincidence. They just might have the same last name. Doctors Tiaz. Can I say that? Doctors Tiaz?
I think that's appropriate.
The Doctors Tiaz.
Yeah. The doctor and his companion.
It's a theory. Thank you for the nerd reference. It's a theory based on the plants too, just like Dr. Bax's theory. But their goal is not to decipher the words, but to tell us what the manuscript, or at least the section of manuscript, is about, a textbook of medieval plant physiology. They claim that you can't actually identify any of the images by the plants, which, sorry, Dr. Bax, is kind of true.
They are hard to identify. And again, this is something we talked about, is the illustrative quality or accuracy
is not high.
They're it's simplistic.
And it's hard, the 15th century plants were a little different back then. We don't really know.
They were kind of misshapen and had no perspective.
No, but we don't know where they're from, right? So we can't even say plants in this area at this time were these. We're kind of in Europe in the maybe 15th century, the plants were kind of maybe this.
And these are the ones that we know were in medieval Europe.
And it vaguely kind of looks like this one, so it might be that one, right? So they say, that's what's not important. They want to talk about the theory to explain the nude women in the green tubs. And the Tiaz theory is totally radically different. It claims that this explains how plants get their nutrition.
So this is truly, and I know the name said this, but this is truly a biological plant physiology book. So this is saying how nutrients go from the roots to the tips.
Yeah, so bear with me, right? As I'm sure most of you know, right? Because you passed second grade. Plants get...
I said didn't, but...
Oh, no! Plants get their nutrition from the sun and the ground, right?
And from the air.
Most of it is through water, nutrient-rich water that they suck up through their roots and then kind of digest using the sun. That's the most simplistic way that I can describe what happens.
Yeah, the sun powers the whole thing.
Yeah. Tiaz and Tiaz suggest that since this idea would have been really new in the 15th century, this manuscript was developed to kind of explain it to people. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Except they sort of slipped and wrote it in a language nobody understood.
So that maybe the manuscript was meant to, and I'm quoting here, delight, entertain, and instruct the reader. And the women would have represented the souls of the plant. Now, you might be wondering, why so many souls per plant? Because it would ostensibly, be one plant per page, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Aristotle actually has a really good answer for this. He said, way before this manuscript was ever made.
That plants are chicks?
No. That plants have a lot of different souls. What he said was that when you cut a human or animal in half, they die because they only have one soul. So you cut their soul in half, their soul dies.
But wait a second. Has anybody ever tried rooting a human being to see if you can actually,
Good question.
Yeah.
We should probably try that next week.
Yeah. Okay.
Anybody want to volunteer?
No, I think we're going to find an outside volunteer for this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I'll work on that.
We'll just go with the theory that when you cut a human in half, they probably die, right?
Normally.
Yeah. But when you cut a plant into half or many different segments, it'll live for a while or forever. Sometimes forever. Sometimes they can kind of regenerate. You replant it.
Well, yeah, exactly. You take cuttings. You take cuttings
and you replant it, and it becomes a new thing. So it follows by ancient kind of theory that plant must have many souls. You look super angry and confused.
I'm confused. I'm following this. This is not in my wheelhouse. I'm following it.
You have to kind
though.
of think ancient times,
and
older.
and that's where I'm having the difficulty.
You're
is
having a hard time regressing.
Yes, I'm following the logic.
You're such a higher being that you're having.
No,
trouble.
it's such a different mode of thinking.
Yeah, it's an allegorical depiction of how the plant works.
Basically,
yeah.
Yes.
The problem I would have with this is, like, for example, the one that I can think of where there's this plant-like structure and it's green and there's all these naked women, but if you look, going, and they're not. It appears from the picture that they're not going up the plant from the soil to the top of the plant. It appears that they're sliding down a water slide into a pool at the bottom. They're going the wrong direction.
The souls might be going the wrong direction, but the water might not be.
Yeah, maybe.
But
I don't know.
But again, I think Joe, I think you're having a bit the same issue I am. Is that we understand that in a plant, in a biological perspective, everything rises from the roots up.
And they don't.
Whereas they may not have had that perspective, and so they viewed it as going down.
Or circulation.
Possibly.
It could have been a circulatory system.
Yeah.
So the other thing about this TS series, they talk a lot about the large amount of Christian religious imagery through the manuscript. They point specifically to, again, the biologic section with these women. A lot of them are holding what can kind of be identified as rosaries. There's one woman holding what is clearly a cross. And they've looked at illuminations or really closely at. One of the sources they cite is if you look really closely at the head of one of the sunflowers, there's a cross in it.
Okay. I need to stop you there because this is the same thing that I had an issue with this being something by Da Vinci. And remember I said people thought they saw his name written in things in kind of a hidden way. I looked at that image and it's happenstance to me that it looks like a cross. You have to infer the cross into that plant. Whereas if I was drawing that and I knew how the seeds were going to radiate out, to me the easiest way is to draw the X and the Y axis of circles to make the seed pattern and then just fill in the holes as you go around, working your way out. So that I have an issue with that.
With the sunflowers.
It also, and also it could have been a plus sign.
Yeah. For all we know, it could have been a plus sign.
It's plant math.
Yeah. I mean, so it is fairly indisputable, however, that the women often have these kind of religious symbols. And I think their theory is that this is the time in history where Christianity is kind of on the rise.
True.
And it's kind of a turbulent time for Christianity.
True.
And that this could really easily be interpreted as like a pagan something. I think, they're kind of where they end their theory is that so these people put these Christian religious things in there so that people would know
insurance.
that it wasn't, so people would know it wasn't pagan.
But it was
insurance
pagan.
policy.
But it was pagan.
Well, no, it was just educational manual.
Well, but you said that they said that it may have been a pagan manual, or were they saying that it might have been mistaken for a pagan manual?
That
so
the author
measures.
and illustrator wanted to ensure that nobody would ever look at this and be like, this is obviously pagan witchcraft.
Okay.
So that they were not pagan, that they were Christian, and they were like, hey, don't worry, guys. this is totally Christian
It's
thing.
totally legit.
Yeah.
Totally legit, above board.
Well, yeah, see, if you're putting naked women in there, you probably want to have some crosses and rosaries too. Just,
Yeah,
like you
totally,
say.
just to make
just to
sure.
cover yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So-
but nudity in art and illustration was not a frowned upon thing at that time. It was the human form, and the females were always represented in that manner.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there were no
so-
naked bike rides. That was kind of like beyond the pale.
Yes,
but,
that was pushing
as far
the
as
envelope.
Paintings, yeah.
So that's kind of the Tiaz theory.
Huh.
It's interesting. It only addresses that one little section.
That's the problem. Is it only addresses one section of the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and as opposed, of course, they're not required to by law to just,
well, I guess
describe the astrological section.
the astrological sections are, I guess, at that point the only sections that they don't really address, right? Because it does address the biologic illuminations, right?
Yeah, the
The
pharmaceutical
plants
stuff
and the
Yeah,
pharmaceutical
yeah.
stuff as well. So it just doesn't address the star stuff.
And that gives it some credence.
Yeah.
I can understand the theory. I understand it better now that you've explained it to me, because when I read it, I didn't get it.
You're welcome.
But thank you. But I have qualms with it. And it's the same thing Joe said, because it's really focused in one
I
area.
agree.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I, again, as I said before, I think that people see what they want to see.
Yeah,
in
and I
it.
can tell you that one of the doctors, Tiaz, is apparently an accomplished watercolorist in plant life. And they are both plant professors, basically.
Either one of
They're-
them like
they're
a
pod people?
calligrapher.
Neither of them is calligrapher.
Oh,
no.
okay.
But they're both biologic doctors. Biologic doctors? Yeah.
Biologist.
Biologists
Yeah.
is the word I was looking for. Thank
Okay.
you. So neither of them are linguistic professors.
Which is why they avoid
Right.
all of the language. Okay,
So-
well, that makes sense.
I don't know if you know this, but have they basically focused on the drawings and not really paid a lot of attention to the text itself?
Yeah, they focused entirely on the drawings, and as far as I can tell, they are no longer researching and are no longer interested in researching
Yeah, it's
the
kind of
Voynich manuscript.
it's kind of a hair puller, you know. It's
Yeah.
like a lot of people.
You know,
like-
this paper that I read was published in, I think, 2002 or something like that, and it's as
Been a
far as I
while.
can tell.
Yeah, that was
that's
like-
the last time. That's the only thing they ever published about it. So, yeah,
Interesting theory.
yeah.
Our next theory is the Nueva España theory, or New Spain theory.
There's a New Spain.
New Spain.
Really?
New Spain is when the Spanish came to the New World,
Yeah.
and they started taking over and conquering. They took over Mexico. and they
1492, right?
A little bit after that.
A little bit after that, yeah. And then they also started taking over parts of the continental U.S. Well, to them, they named it all New Spain.
Kind of like New York, huh?
Yeah, basically, yeah, or New Amsterdam as it's called, but yes. So that is what Nueva España means, is New Spain, and that's the area that it references in. And New Spain really took up a lot of the center of the current United States. So it's a very huge area. So the Nueva España theory is put out by two gentlemen. We've got Dr. Arthur Tucker and Mr. Rexford Talbert. And I had some brief email correspondence with Dr. Tucker, and he was kind enough to send me their research and their writing
Yeah.
in a condensed format, but there's a lot to it. But let me kind of boil down what their theory is. What these two gentlemen decided to do was, rather than try to decipher the text right off, they did something similar to what the doctors Tiaz did,
The doctor's Tiaz.
which is they focused on the illustrations. They wanted to try and figure out if they could pinpoint those illustrations to specific plants, and they didn't just focus on Europe. They looked at plants that were known and had been discovered across all of the known world at that time. And we're talking the mid 1500s. What they found, when I say the mid 1500s, that's when they think the manuscript was first, quote unquote, discovered.
So they don't believe it happened in the 1400s?
Well, they're basing it off of plants that they knew were in the mid 1500 range, and that's based on some other writings, which I'll get to in just a second. But what they did is they looked at the plants, and one of the ones that they found was called the soap plant.
Oh.
They matched up the illustration in the description, the illustration to other books that were put out in this time range. The soap plant is depicted in the 1552 Codex Cruz Batanus of Mexico. And I might have mangled that pronunciation, but it's a book that came out of Mexico at that time. And it evidently is considered the first medical text that was ever written in the New World. And
it was written by the Spanish?
Yes. And they took that and they said, wait, we've got these illustrations from that region of the world that seem to match this one plant. Let's try and match it to others, which is not a bad way to do it. Let's not look at, I can't understand what the writing is, so let me see if I know what the pictures are.
Yeah. That's how kids learn how to read, right?
It really is.
I'm still working on that.
According to their research, they have identified 37 plants, 6 animals, and 1 mineral in the manuscript to the Americas.
How did they identify the mineral? That's what I'm curious about.
I'm not exactly positive how they came to that conclusion, to be honest. I read their research, but it's a little above my pay grade, and so I didn't quite understand everything.
Let's be honest, this whole thing is above our pay grade.
No, we're going to crack this one. Don't worry about it.
But anyway, these plants were depicted in other writings from post-conquest Mexico and North America.
Interesting.
So they're saying, well, we see these and we see those, so we kind of draw the two together and say that it must have come out of that region of the world.
So are they saying then that plants in the New World are blobbier and lack perspective?
I don't know that they're saying that.
No, but I guess my question would be that the female figures, right, not to drive too hard on this, but they are very clearly very European.
Yeah.
And it's kind of Western European. It's not what you see.
The illustration style of Mexico and North America at that time when the Spanish had come was very different.
Different, and that even just the illustration style of that time in Spain was totally... You don't see naked women from Spain in this period. In fact, you see, really covered in black clothing, very, morose women from Spain in this period. So I wonder if they have a theory to kind of reconcile that.
Of course, this is New Spain. Let's not forget.
And that's exactly it, because you got to remember that there's multiple cultures that have been conquered, and they have different beliefs, and they have a different way of doing things, and it may have been this weird melting pot.
I guess, yeah.
And here's something that they write, because they do try to address the text. They don't try and crack it, but they do try and address it.
Yeah, what do you say?
And I'm going to, let me read this directly here. A search of the surviving codices and manuscripts from Nueva España in the 16th century reveals the calligraphy of the Voynich manuscript to be similar to the Codex Osuna, which is 1563 to 1566, evidently was written in Mexico City. Loan words for the plant and animal names have been identified from the classical, and again, I'm going to apologize on the pronunciation.
Nahuatl?
How is that again?
Nahuatl?
That one?
Nahuatl, I'm sorry.
Nahuatl, yes. That, the Spanish, the Taino, and mixed texts, which are all different cultures in that area. So they're kind. To me, it sounds like we're melting them all together. Everybody's together, and the styles are all kind of shifting together, and they're similarities.
I gotta say though, I took a look at the Codex Osuna, and I didn't think the calligraphy was all that similar.
It's not. Well, and this is the issue. It's the same thing again. I don't mean to beat a dead horse here, but we go back to Da Vinci. Yeah, the style is the same, but everybody kind of used the same kind of writing implement, which forces you to write in a similar manner.
No, I
but
suppose
they're
that's
not
true.
the same.
I don't know. I kind of like the theory that like it's another relic of the Aztecs.
And that's kind of where this points. I never saw them come out directly and say this is an Aztec language derivative, but you really kind of get that sense from the way they write about it.
I see that, but again, the Codex Osuna was written by by Spaniards. Correct,
It
not
was.
by Aztecs.
Right.
Right, and so these guys actually took the trouble to learn this ancient written language of the Aztecs before they murdered them.
Well, but if you think about not every Aztec would have been killed. Some of them would have escaped either as slaves or free people who then got a job and they pass this on to their children. You've got to hang on to your cultures as every culture does. Teach it to your children so it doesn't go away.
Yeah.
And some of that might have bled through.
I got to tell you, I looked at some of the alphabets and of the indigenous peoples like the Mayans, the Olmecs, and the Aztecs, and they didn't seem to have a written alphabet so much as hieroglyphics. And so, I mean, I don't know that there's any evidence that any of the indigenous cultures here had any kind of writing system like this.
But
I gotta
go
be
ahead.
honest. I think one of the most compelling theories in terms of who might have written this is that it was, like a slave language or a gypsy roving caravan language, because it just kind of fits the parameters, right? It's a language that's actively trying to be not what a lot of people are writing then. It's meant to be a private language, but that it's written for a lot of people, but that it was a group of people that could have very easily been integrated into a different culture or died out. I think that's a very interesting idea.
It is, with that theory, the problem I have with it is that there would be other remnants of this language around, and instead of just this one thing. And so that's why I find that a little hard to believe.
But that's also the hard part about history, and especially areas that are in a lot of turmoil during history.
Yeah.
Think about all the relics from the past that have been burned and destroyed
Yeah.
through wars. Or
Think about all the
fires
libraries that have been burned. Yeah,
I mean,
know.
these things,
It's true.
People gather, oh my gosh, these are all the same. We've got to house them. We've got to protect them. And then somebody drops a lamp and the whole thing goes up in smoke.
Yeah.
So it could be that they had collected all this stuff and somebody was writing it, and it was the interlibrary loan of the Aztec world, and they sent it to somebody else, and then the entire library goes up in flames, and here's the one surviving copy of it.
Yeah.
Well, actually, one thing I could conceive of is that imagine an ancient surviving text from somewhere, something that's really, really old. And somebody, like a monk along about the 14th, 15th century, finds it, and it's kind of crumbling, and he thinks, I've got nothing else going on in my life. So, maybe what I'll do is I'm going to copy this whole thing over, even though I don't even quite understand it. Copy the whole thing over, and just so it's preserved for posterity. And so maybe if this thing is actually real, which again I'm not buying into that entirely, but maybe if it is, maybe it actually dates back a lot further.
And somebody basically made a hand copy of
Somebody
it,
copied it,
and
yeah.
that's the one we have. So
That's the one
we're
we
looking
have.
at a flawed copy, is what you're saying.
No, it might be a meticulous copy, but it's a copy, so that means that number one, it's not going to be precise. It's not going to be a Xerox.
Yeah, and it could be potentially, thousands.
That's
of
what I'm
years
saying.
older.
It's something that could be much, much older than the 14th or 15th centuries.
Interesting.
And that's a good theory. I hadn't even thought about that before.
I only thought about it just now.
Well, while we're on crazy theories,
Let's go to crazy
yes.
theories.
I have one because I feel like that's like a little bit of a loony theory.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
What, my theory?
Yeah, I like the lunacy of it.
Yeah.
This one, however,
That's even loonier.
I shouldn't be cruel, right? I should be kind.
But you are.
But a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's have it.
There's a guy,
What's the guy's name?
Vico Latvala.
Latvala? Yeah. That's a crazy name.
It's a pretty crazy
He
name.
must be crazy.
Yeah. So he thinks that the Voynich manuscript details the spontaneous creation of DNA through the use of sound or a direct line from God.
Yeah. No,
I shouldn't laugh.
It all
No,
makes
I'm not
sense,
making
yeah.
fun of anything. Keep going, because this is where it gets
Well,
worse.
so basically, he thinks that this manuscript is not something to be deciphered. It is something to read and pray on and channel prophecy directly from God.
Yeah.
So he says it's religious text, basically.
Yeah. So
Well,
he
it's more than even a religious text. It sounds like it's kind of like,
It's like-
the Ark of the Covenant. It's actually it channels enormous energies. Is
right.
that-
No,
if
I
I'm
guess
reading
how
that
I
right?
would how I would describe it is like when people speak in tongues. That it's like written in tongues almost, right?
okay.
And that like you could read it and pray on it and meditate on it, and if you were the special kind of chosen person by God, he would come down to you and say, "Oh, yeah, this is what it means." So he's actually using this method, has deciphered some of it for us, and I will read to you what he says it is. This is verbatim.
And again, he deciphered this how? Just through
Just
God?
by praying on it and God telling
okay.
him.
All right.
Because he's one of the worthy people.
You know, I got to say, that's a pretty cool encipherment system. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
unbreakable.
Okay, so the name of the flower is Heart of Fire. It makes the skin beautiful when made in ointment. The oil is pressed from the buds. The ointment is used for the wrinkles. It is suitable for the kidneys and the head. As the flower prevents inflammations, it is antibiotic. Plant is 10 centimeters in its height. It grows hot and dry slants. The plant is bright green by its color.
Huh. And it's in Ethiopia.
Somewhere in Ethiopia.
Yeah.
You're welcome, everyone.
Well, you know, actually, I've got some wrinkles. I'm going to Ethiopia.
Yeah.
For
I
funny
guess,
fun.
you know, the thing is like, believe what you want, but it's like, how hard is it to believe somebody who says, well, I am the only person who
That's
can decipher
convenient.
this?
Yeah.
Through the years, there's been a lot of charlatans that have come
Yeah.
forward and said they had the translation. And I'm not going to pitch a stone at this guy, but he seems to be part of that camp to me. That's kind of,
Most likely, yeah.
it just seems too convenient,
Yeah.
especially for something that's so popular.
The thing that I know about people who actually receive prophecies is that they don't go around screaming about it, and they don't speak in the way that this guy is speaking, which is like, I'm so much better than you. I know everything. And this is what
So there's a little arrogance in there that you don't appreciate.
that arrogance. Yeah, I
Okay.
think that, like, you know, if you, okay, fine, whatever, you're going to receive a prophecy from God, sure.
It should come with a little humility.
Yeah,
Because think
maybe
about it
don't say you're the greatest person in the world.
Well, exactly, because, leave that to your followers to do.
And
because-
I've now set up a website where you can donate at.
Yeah, because I know, I mean, if I've got a direct line to God, I don't want to piss God off and you know, queer that whole deal, you know, so I'm gonna totally be, you know, humble about the whole thing.
I don't know. It's just a weird...
Yeah,
situation.
That's a loony, incoherent theory. What about the lizard people?
Dr. Bax suggested this theory.
Yeah, he said one of
Well,
his...
somebody
I'm
suggested
sorry. I guess
to
somebody
him.
suggested
it to him.
that's
Don't
misrepresentation.
misrepresent him.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
suggested this theory.
Yeah, that there's like subterranean lizard people.
So what do
who
you
wrote
think? Do you
this.
want to let him tell it?
Yeah, let's have
let
this
the
one
doctor tell it.
he had a pretty good take on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Well, a recent one, I actually appeared on Coast to Coast Radio on US radio a few nights ago, and someone emailed me and suggested that they're convinced that the manuscript was written by lizards from outer space living inside the Earth.
Yeah. No, that was me. No, just kidding.
No, I said to them, I hope not, because that means that we may be somebody's lunch quite soon.
I know.
But anyway, that was one idea which I haven't seen before.
Okay, well, so much for the lizard people. So next theory is that it's a hoax. There's a couple of different theories out there. One is that Voynich himself created this entire thing and made up that he bought it somewhere in Italy. And I think that's kind of unbelievable because, number one, why would anybody bother? But more importantly, the age of the materials. Did he happen to stumble across some vellum and some ink that was like 500 years old?
Yeah, I remember Bax had a pretty interesting take on this.
Yeah,
one.
he really did.
Yeah, Dr. Bax did.
Or illuminating.
Let's go to him.
A few years ago, the Yale Library, which owns the manuscript now, they got some people from the University of Arizona to look at the vellum and study it. So they took very tiny samples of the vellum from different parts of the manuscript and they analysed them and found that they're very consistent in their dating to round about 1420, 1430, with a certain range, of course, but definitely it's 15th century. And that threw out a lot of the other theories. There were theories that it was made in the 17th century or that it was a 20th century hoax and so on. But unless somebody kept a large amount of expensive vellum for hundreds of years without using it, which seems a bit unlikely, I reckon it's a 15th century manuscript. And also the ink, they've analysed the ink, and that's all entirely consistent with that date. There are no kind of modern chemicals in it and so on. So it seems to me that's one of the few things we can be pretty sure about, that it's a 15th century manuscript.
Another theory is that it was a hoax by Roger Bacon, Sir Roger Bacon. Was he Sir? Well, he was a knight, wasn't he?
Definitely.
I think so, yeah.
So Sir Roger Bacon, some people have theorized that it was created by Roger Bacon. Bacon, as you know, is one of the original fathers of the scientific method, and Voynich himself believed that Bacon wrote the book and that only Bacon would have the capability of doing so. The problem with this theory is that Bacon died in 1294, which is long before the book was created.
Wah, wah.
Yeah, so that...
Unless somebody was copying his work like you had suggested.
That's a
then
possibility.
it could have been Bacon.
Somebody could have copied it, but it wasn't Bacon. Yeah, it wasn't Bacon. I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why.
Well, no, I'm sorry. I asked.
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Bacon didn't do it. It could have been a hoax. Somebody could have done it. Somebody could have done this as a hoax. The reason I don't think it was a hoax is this. Previously, I mentioned page 75, and I've found other pages that have some recurring words. So there's a word on here that I'll call Golf CC8G. So if you look at it, look at the...
I would say it was an A, actually.
Yeah? You think so?
Yeah. Golf A 83.
Yeah.
89.
So this is what I was talking about that recurred a couple of times in the page that you wouldn't expect to in any sort of sophisticated
If it was a cipher, right.
Right. Well, on the same page, this word appears like about 19 times. And
I was noticing that.
And small variations on the word. I've underlined them in different. The word itself I've underlined in orange, and the variations I've underlined in green. So have a look.
Yeah. So it looks a bit like there's the A, but also maybe it's like a C, but maybe it's like two C's.
So it's a question of is this a small variation? Is this just bad handwriting? Variations in handwriting? Because they're all slightly different, but it looks to me like just differences in handwriting.
I agree with that.
So the word appears like many, many, many times on this page, and sometimes it appears one right after the other. And so if you're trying to concoct a convincing hoax, especially if you're Sir Roger Bacon, a smart guy, then you're not going to do something as stupid as this unless you have utter contempt for the people you're trying to fool. And I think it goes for pretty much any hoaxer that you're not going to repeat the word 40 times on a single page.
Steve looks really displeased.
Well, and I know Joe and I briefly discussed this. Is I see in the words that you've pointed out some similarities, but they're not identical to me. And when I look at them, let's just call it the last three characters. Seem to be relatively consistent with a small variance, but let's just call them consistent.
Yeah.
But I don't see that means it's the same word. To me, it's the same thing as having ing at the end of something. So I am seeing, being, believing. Those all end in the same.
I guess for me to take Joe's side on this, the first part looks really, really similar in all those words. There's just the middle, one or two letters, depending on the word, that are a little different. And I think that, so write believing 12 times in a row. It's not going to look the exact same.
No, it's not going to look identical. You're absolutely right.
And so that's what I think we're seeing is small handwriting variations. And
I know that you're looking at these, and some of these, I'm looking at the same page as you are, and I don't think that they are identical, and let me just explain why.
Okay.
Is if you look at words that are written in an older handwriting or even typesetting style, you can see, let's say, the letter F. There's what's known as a ligature where two letters are joined. So if you have an FF,
Yeah.
It can be just lowercase, right next to each other, or there's a ligature where the F's are actually connected to make what looks like one character, but it is one character in a typesetting perspective.
I've seen that in
they're
older text,
two different.
yeah.
Some of those look like the cross of what we're saying is the F of golf. Sometimes seems to be short and contained. Sometimes seems to come across the L. And I don't disagree that maybe that is just handwriting. But to me, in a way, I almost wonder if they are different and distinct characters. I'm not disavowing what you're saying. I see intricacies in the letter forms that I don't know mean that they're the same, but it's handwriting. It's hard to say.
Yeah, it is hard to say. But
I have just drawn on this.
you did draw it. Yeah.
Do you know how much that's worth?
Yeah.
I know.
I've just drawn on this
stole
original
this out of the
stuff.
collection. I've been going over it with a highlighter. I'm gonna mail it back to him when we're done with this.
The way that the author forms the A, it's kind of like two C's.
Mm-hmm.
And I just drew on there. Joe's looking at it right now.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's like, I think that's just handwriting. Like this one
Yeah.
here, for example, there's two C's, but there's sort of like the second
Very
C is
close.
drawn. It's so close it almost looks like they're one character, but
Yeah.
I think they're two C's.
This is
And-
not.
And this is why this has been going on for at
Yeah.
least 100 years that we know of, for sure, if not 3 or 4.
Yeah, I know exactly. But what I'm saying is that, like, as far as the hoax thing goes, the fact that the same word, and it appears to me to be the same word.
Steve, let's just accept
and let's-
that it's
but-
the same
Okay,
word.
well, I'm going to run with it.
Okay.
Let's just accept that if you're doing a hoax, you're not going to do words that look very, very similar to the word right next to them.
Yeah.
Over and over again in your text. You're not going to do that because you want to have a really convincing hoax. Mm-hmm. So this is not the way to do it. So obviously these people were either very incompetent hoaxsters or it was not a hoax. All right, well, so much for the hoax. We've conclusively proven it's not a hoax. And so, well, not exactly. Because, I mean, actually, if you're a hoaxster, you're probably kind of convinced that your readers are lazy. You're not going to get past the third page.
Yeah.
And this
They're
doesn't
just gonna
occur.
gloss over and over and
They're
over
just
and
going
over.
to sort of glance at it, look at the pictures, especially the naked bodies, stuff like that. Yeah, so
That's the blah, blah, blah. We should note that the words that we were just talking about are literally right next to a pool with a bunch of naked women in it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
On to our next theory. The next theory is it's just gibberish. Gordon Rugg, a British psychologist, says that there's a case that it might just be entirely made up and just gibberish. He published a paper in 2004 saying that it's a hoax, most likely, and he had come up with a system that uses a grill of words, basically. So he's got 3 tables side by side, prefix, root, suffix, and then a piece of cardboard that's got 3 little rectangles cut in it. You move this thing around on there, and wherever you light upon, you get 3, 1 or 2 characters for the prefix, and maybe 3 for the root, and 1 or 2 for the suffix. You just copy those down onto a manuscript, and then move it, copy the next set down, copy the next set down. You can come up with a gibberish system that is very consistent and kind of convincing,
So basically, he made up gibberish language to prove that though this looks like regular language, it's just hooey.
or it could be.
He also named the suspect, which was Edward Kelly. It was a con artist.
Edward Kelly.
Yeah.
I've not heard of Kelly.
Yeah, he. If you're one of our listeners, you might want to do a Google on this. There's a language that Edward Kelly and this other guy created. Andreas Schinner, I believe, was him. They created a language they called Enochian, which is spelled Enochian.
He was close friends with Queen Elizabeth I.
Yeah.
Just throw that out there.
Yeah, Enochian. So Enochian is there's a wiki on it, and you can read all about it. It doesn't the characters don't look like this, but it's entirely conceivable that this guy maybe could have made up another bogus language besides Enochian. But besides fraud, I mean, we're back into the fraud thing again. Another theory is that it's gibberish because it was just basically somebody who was autistic did this, and so somebody was just like just sat down with, he's maybe from a wealthier family, so they actually had some vellum and ink for him to write with. So if you're a peasant, you probably don't have that. And or maybe he was an autistic monk, and he just wrote a lot of gibberish and drew a lot of weird drawings and stuff. And I think that the autistic, based on my looking at some of these pages, and I'm going to show you guys another one here. On page 75, we saw the recurrence of a particular word, in my opinion, and Devin's, I think, many times. And you get along to page 80. It's another one I randomly selected, and the word of the day on that one is one that I call Golfaw, Golffaw, and that appears many, many times on this page. The other one, Golf CC8G, appears on here too, but it seems to not appear quite as much. Yeah, which would suggest to me that somebody who is possibly autistic and somebody who's a little OCD, he'll fixate on a set of characters and reproduce those over and over again until another one comes along that catches his interest, and he starts writing those.
I can see that. That makes sense.
And it's not,
and we've seen things like that in today.
Yeah, and the fact of the matter is that I can't think of any comprehensible language, any language that we know about, that would have this kind of repetition in it. This is not. I don't believe that this is language. I think it's gibberish. So basically what I'm putting forth is the autistic monk theory. Yeah.
I can see that, and I'm not going to disparage that at all. What I do wonder, though, is if we look at this, some people have said, well, this is a scientific manual of some kind. And have any of you ever cracked open a biology book and you'll see the Latin name followed with a derivative that's more of a general name, and you'll see that word every couple of words in there? It's the genus blah blah blah, genus blah blah blah, genus blah blah blah, genus in different variants. So I almost wonder if it's, let's just say it was the soap plant, because that was in the New Spain theory, it's the soap plant, something something, soap plants plural, and then something something, soap planting. I don't know. I mean, I'm just spitballing here, but I could see why that repetition might be in there for that one, because they're referencing it specifically over and over. And I know that what people prescribe as the names of the plants on the pages aren't the words that you're pulling out. But I'm looking at it and I'm wondering if maybe that's a possible reason for this frequency that you're seeing.
To further that, right, if we're going to take like the Latin name of a plant, some Latin names of plants are this word repeated this word, right? Like Brutus Brutus or something. Obviously, that's not
it's possible.
Legit.
So
that would help explain why it'd be like in succession. I honestly, like, just throw that out there. Don't know where I land on this theory. I'm somewhere between the two of you.
Well, I'm going to tell you. I have not had a chance to review a huge amount of this manuscript. I'll probably look at some more of it. I'm not going to devote my life to it. I haven't had that much time, so I went out and basically randomly picked some pages and just started looking at stuff and looking at patterns. And so I started noticing repetition in the words.
And once you point it out, I see it.
Yeah.
And so I would encourage our listeners to go out and look at page 75 and page 80 and look for the repetition.
But also look at other pages.
But also look at other pages and tell us what you think. Tell us what you think about the theory. See if you find the similar sort of pattern of repetition of words over and over again, which would kind of support the theory that I think, and it's true crowdsourcing here. So to support my theory that this was some person with OCD or a person with autism who was sat down in a little room somewhere with some vellum and some ink and just did his thing.
Just obsessed over
the one word.
And just kept doing it over and over.
And so there is another theory. This is also from page 75. There's a 4-letter grouping that appears repeatedly also in some of the words that we've talked about, like, say, golf, CC8G. It's the first 4 letters of that word, which really do look to my eyes like golf, GOLF.
Yeah,
they really do.
They do. Now that you've said it,
appear many, many times in that page.
I can just imagine ancient plaid shorts.
Yeah, exactly.
Or, as we saw recently, PBR shorts.
Yeah. So anyway, take a look at that. Tell me what you think. Would you agree that it appears there a lot?
Oh, yeah. But I guess for me, there are a lot of languages in this world that instead of doing like ing like we do, right?
Yeah.
Do a prefix like
That's
that.
possible too.
Right?
But
Doesn't Arabic do something like that?
nah, it's a suffix in Arabic. But,
It is.
No, anyway, but if you look at it, though, it does look like golf, which leads me to believe that this was actually a text written by a medieval golf pro.
Yeah.
It's a manual of golfing
I
and
mean-
plans to avoid.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Exactly, and in this particular spot, he's got the naked chicks on the golf green. Do you see that? It's green and they're naked. Yeah, And so I
That's how
think
you distract your rivals at the game.
Yeah. So it's a medieval golf pro. So
All right.
do we have any other theories?
We do.
Another one?
We do. I think we have one more. It's just the one more left, which is opening the gates to Crazy Town. We talked about the lizard people a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people are putting forth that they think that this is a book written in an alien language by an alien people who have left it for us to teach us what I don't know.
You know what? I gotta be honest with you. I am so glad that our listeners like that we hate the alien theories.
Yeah.
Here's the thing about the alien theory, and this is pretty interesting. When you get into, I think it's the cosmological section where there's kind of what seems to be almost like celestial bodies.
Yeah.
Well, there's illustrations that appear to be the Milky Way galaxy, the spiral of the Milky Way.
Yeah.
And they also appear to be the Andromeda galaxy. And the thing is, we can, because we have the technological capabilities
We have
now,
the technology.
We have the
We can
technology
make them
to
better,
look
smarter,
at these
faster.
galaxies. We can see what they look like.
Yeah.
The problem is that if this was written in the early to mid 1400s, we didn't have the technology to see that.
No,
We didn't have eyes?
Yeah, no.
The telescope to be able to focus on a galaxy that is so far away, or to have something that could see our own galaxy. We didn't have that. I mean,
Yeah, they definitely,
the regular telescope using lenses that came about in the 1600s. Is that about right?
I think even earlier than that, but I mean,
But it
even
wasn't as such a high quality that you could see a blob.
Yeah, exactly. At the time that this was written, people were already looking at Andromeda. It had already been noted, but yeah, you couldn't make out the spiral arms of the galaxy.
We couldn't get the clarity.
Oh no.
So that's where people say, well, we couldn't see it that well to note all that detail to then draw and record that,
Therefore,
which
it
means
must have
that
been aliens.
somebody else was out there and able to see that. Yeah.
No, I mean, Galileo was around in like the late 1500s. I guess, I don't know how accurate carbon dating is. I don't know how sure we are about this stuff.
That is the hard part with the carbon dating,
that's
but
within 100 years. I feel like that's maybe within the margin of error.
But no, Galileo, I don't think ever made out the spiral arms of Andromeda.
No,
Yeah.
he personally, probably not, but...
Yeah.
But that's
I don't
a
know.
high level of detail.
Yeah, I don't think.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
But also, who's to say... I am apparently playing devil's advocate on this one.
Today you are.
Yeah.
Apparently, who's to say that wasn't just like a artistic license?
Exactly. Somebody just made up a spiral. So the spiral, I missed this particular illustration. Is it a spiral as seen from above, or is it at sort of an oblique angle? Like
It's from
Andromeda?
above.
Yeah, exactly.
It's from above.
Yeah, exactly.
So it could very
be-
easily be people, again, seeing what they want to see and
Yeah.
applying it to what we now know.
Yeah, exactly. And so the aliens might have shared with us the Andromeda, or we also live in a spiral galaxy, and so the aliens might be a depiction of our own galaxy. Okay, Devin just held up a picture of it to me. This is obviously a garden. It's obviously a sketch.
It looks a bit like
It's
a
plan.
labyrinth.
Yeah,
but
it's a plan for a garden. Okay, no galaxy. Never mind.
Ancient
Yeah.
landscape architect at work.
It might have been that the aliens came down to us and basically brought us tributes of shrubbery.
I maintain that this looks like. I just pulled up another picture of it, of course. But I maintain that it looks a lot like a video game map of the world. Or I don't know, like a blueprint for buildings or something. I mean, it could be a lot of things.
Yeah.
We kind of say, oh, it's stars, but...
And again, with something where you don't know what the hell the text is describing, I can make it anything I want.
Absolutely.
This is why I like the approach that Dr. Bax is taking so much.
Because he's trying to figure out the words to then figure out what they are.
He has been presented, right, with so many different theories about like, oh, maybe this person wrote it, maybe it's about this. And he keeps saying, that's very interesting, but I'm going to approach the text.
Yeah, linguistically. A smart move.
Because you can say, the minute you say, this is about biology, you start to decode the text, and it's about biology. Mm-hmm. Because you can make it be whatever you want it to be. Yeah. So, again, that's why I think like his approach is really the most interesting and probably the best approach that we have right now.
Yeah, though, Dr. Bax, if you're listening, please look at pages 75 and 80. Before you spend too much more time on this, I'm a little disturbed by what I see there.
And
I feel kind of bad about this. I've been pretty busy lately, and I didn't have time to start attacking this until pretty recently. And if I had more time, I would have been looking at more pages to find more of this stuff. But that's what our listeners are for. They're going to go out and do this.
Well, and that's what the last couple of 100 years of people trying to figure it out before you have also been doing. So there's a ton of legwork already done for us.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any last minute theories to put out on this one before we put it to bed?
No.
Pod people, no. Let's see. Perfect spheres, no.
The Tyler.
No, it's definitely not him. So,
okay.
Joe? What you believe that it's gibberish?
I think that it's gibberish written by an autistic person, most likely.
Okay, Devin, how about you? Where do you fall on this?
I honestly don't fall anywhere on this. I think that, as I was just saying, that Dr. Bax's approach is kind of probably the most solid approach, is that you just kind of have to say, but let's see if we can decipher the text. Although I do like the theory that was floated in the AMA that it was this like family that wrote this thing. They were all really smart. It has kind of Hindi flares. It might have been Italian. But 99% of me says, I don't know.
Got it. Well, I also really like the direction that Dr. Bax is going. It seems the most solid and concrete. I also appreciate the different approach that Dr. Tucker took with the Nueva España. That seems to have some credence. I see holes in it, but I see holes in just about everything that's done.
Yeah.
And so I unfortunately, I'm not settled on one particular theory. I see things that I like that are promising. And that's as far as I'm willing to go.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any theories...
I'm sure you do.
Then we would love to hear from you. There's, if you want to see any of the research that we've got, and we'll put up a bunch of this research.
There's a lot of it.
There's a lot of it. And we'll commingle it.
3 hours?
Yeah, 17 hours later, we're done recording. We will put up a bunch of the links. Those links are going to be on our website. As always, that is going to be thinkingsidewayspodcast.com. You can listen to the episodes while you're on the website. I know a lot of people are doing that, and then some people like to download them, and a lot of people go to iTunes to get those. If you're on iTunes, go ahead and take the time to subscribe. Leave us a comment and rating if you get the chance. A lot of folks are leaving comments on the website as well, which is fantastic. You can always get us on Stitcher, so if you don't have the time to go to not able to get the website and you use Stitcher from any mobile device, you can stream the episodes right there. We're on Facebook, So you can find us, you can like us. At the suggestion of a listener, we recently created a Facebook group for our listeners to get together and chat about stories, stuff like that, which seems to slowly be building a little momentum.
How's that going? Is there a lot of people joining in on that?
It's starting to gain some momentum. It's a little slow right now, but it's brand
We
new.
haven't told anyone about it yet, though. So
yeah.
That's exactly the problem. Is not a lot of people know.
Okay, now you know.
Yes, now they
Facebook
know.
Group.
And if you want to go ahead and tell us your theories, you could just write us an email. That email address is thinkingsidewayspodcast@gmail.com.
we try to respond pretty quickly.
Pretty quickly, yeah. We
Us?
try to stay up on top of it.
It's not always us. Usually it's an intern, but yeah.
He loves the idea of an intern.
Yeah.
But no, we do try to get back to everybody as quickly as possible. And I know there's a few folks who probably haven't gotten a reply yet. I apologize. We've just been a little swamped with this story. But we will get
And
to
plus
you.
we all have jobs too.
Yeah, there's that.
So yeah, it's
but
not.
That having been said, that is the mystery of the Voynich manuscript. It's a
Solved.
lot of information. Thank you, everybody, for staying with us for the whole time. It's a lot, I understand, but hopefully you've gotten some of the things that you hadn't heard before, because that's what we're trying to do, is get you as many as we can.
Exactly.
I feel like we should put an Easter egg in for all the people who made it to this point.
Oh, that's a good point. Easter egg.
We're awesome, and so are you.
That's a good one. Baby,
All right.
you're a firework.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks a lot. We'll talk to you next week.
And you're special.
It's just so special.